Hello, and thank you for meeting with us today. This interview is designed to help you articulate the assessment thinking you have been building throughout this course. You're welcome to refer to your assessment artifact and notes as we talk. We will begin with a warm-up question, and then we're going to move into 3 scored questions that focus on the purpose of assessment, how assessment supports different learners across cognitive levels and forms of evidence, and how you hope to carry this process forward into your future classroom practice. Do you have any questions before we begin?
No.
Awesome. Let's start with our warm-up question. If intelligence had to be represented as something other than test scores, what would you use instead and why?
I think I would really use them explaining how they get to an answer. I feel like there's a lot of times that students get the wrong answer, but the way they were trying to get to the answer followed the steps. And you can really see that sometimes in like math. So just like prioritizing listening to them explain how they came up with an answer, what they thought about the answer can really show like the intelligence behind it, because yeah, they may have gotten the answer wrong, but now I can also see how they're getting there and they could be on the right track. It's just one little step, and that can really help me like differentiate to help them get to the correct answer in the end.
Awesome. We're going to now move on to the scored questions, and the first one is going to focus on the purpose of assessment. And so when you look at the assessment system you have designed, what does it reveal about what you believe the purpose of assessment should be for student learning? And as you answer, please help me see how your design reflects an assessment vision that is inclusive, service-oriented, and resilient enough to support learners over time.
Yes, so as I was like looking at my assessment system and building it and analyzing it, it really did show me that I believe like the purpose of assessment is to support and guide student learning, not just measure it at the end. And I saw this because my assessment design includes like pre-formative assessments and summative assessments, which allows me to understand where students start, how they are progressing through the unit, and what they understand by the end of the unit. For example, within my assessment, there's the pre-assessment at the start, which helps me see students' prior knowledge about story elements, so then I can adjust my instruction to meet their needs and meet them where they're at. And then throughout the unit, I use multiple formative assessments like exit tickets, story maps, and discussions to just overall check for their understanding, see where we are at, maybe if we need to touch on a story element again, or they all really have this story element down, we can actually move on. And they're very low pressure opportunities for the students to practice and grow, but also it gives them the chance to see their progress themselves. And this is very service oriented because they're not judged on just the final product. They have multiple chances to grow in their learning, to see where things may be missing, what they're excelling in, but also gives them different ways to show their learning. They can draw, they can write, they can speak, and each formative assessment has the option to do more than just writing. It's also very resilient as over time the assessments build on each other, from identifying story elements to eventually creating their own story about their own wild thing. And this progression supports all learners, and it just shows growth throughout it because it's not all about just the final performance, but what you see throughout the unit.
Awesome answer. So for our second question, we're going to move into learner differences, the different cognitive levels, and using multiple forms of assessment. So I'd like you to talk me through how your assessment design responds to learner differences and supports students across the full range of cognitive levels. And as you answer, please help me see how your system uses multiple forms of assessment in ways that create meaningful opportunities for different students, or for different students to show what they know and what they can do.
Yes, so my assessment design supports learner differences as there's multiple forms of assessment and allowing students to show their understanding in multiple ways. So for example, students can respond through writing, drawing, or speaking, which supports different learning styles and different developmental levels. Some kids may not be the best at writing, but they can express what they've learned very well, and they know what they're what they have learned or what they're learning, but it's easier for them to speak it out. And so giving them that option, or maybe draw it out, can really help them. I also intentionally designed this unit to move through the different depths of knowledge levels. So at DOK1, the students identified those basic story elements. That's where we're using that pre-assessment to kind of understand what they know ahead of time, but also just kind of learning the different story elements as we go. And then you move into DOK2, where they organize and retell events using a story map. So this is kind of getting them into that more of understanding how different story elements and how different things within a story move together, how they all connect, but it gives them another way to express that by using the story map. And then we move into DOK3, and that's them participating in discussions where they explain their thinking and use evidence from the text. So this discussion is with their peers, and I'm kind of walking around, kind of listening to them. Maybe if a conversation gets off task, I can be there to kind of bring them back. But it's giving them that opportunity to talk with their peers, and they don't need to be writing, and they can actually just express what they're learning in a new way that maybe they don't really see as often, because sometimes it's hard to have discussions, especially peer-to-peer, because it's easy for young kids to get off topic. But this is giving them a chance to express what they're learning, and it's not just the same always writing, always drawing type ordeal. And then finally at the DOK4, they're creating their own story based off their own wild thing that they create with art supplies. And this is just applying everything that they have learned together. And just it can help them see as they go through like how where we started actually connects to the end, and it's not just do this final project and then we're not going to touch it again. This progression allows all students to access the content at different levels while also being challenged to think more. So I really like that the assessments I made have the opportunity that you don't just need to be writing, you could be drawing, you could be speaking. That gives access to students who maybe writing's not their favorite thing to do, maybe they struggle, or maybe they can't really draw, but they can tell you about something for hours on end, and that just gives them the chance to really express themselves, be themselves, but also show that they are learning. It also just creates meaningful opportunities for students to demonstrate their understanding, whether they're just beginning to identify the story elements or they're ready to create and explain their own ideas. So using multiple forms like exit tickets, discussions, graphic organizers, and storytelling ensures that assessment is not just that kind of one size fits all, because there's not an average student within a classroom. And instead it gives every student a chance to succeed and show what they know in a way that kind of works best for them and that they're most comfortable.
Awesome, those are great answers. Thank you for bringing the depth of knowledge to life through the way that you articulated that. We're going to move to now our third question, which is about how we're going to carry assessment forward into our future practices. And so as you begin to move into practicum and then student teaching and the next stages of your Graceland pathway, please talk me through how you see yourself carrying this assessment process going forward. And in doing so, help me understand how you would use it to make instructional decisions, support student learning, and build flexible assessment systems you can use across different context areas and also in real-world class context.
Yes, so as I move into practicum and student teaching, I can see myself easily bringing this assessment into that process as it's very flexible. So this assessment's based off of the book Where the Wild Things Are, but you can base it off of any book. That final project can be based off any book that you see. So say Where the Wild Things Are isn't going to work in a classroom or where they're at within the year, I can still tweak the assessment, change a few of the pre-assessments, the other formative stuff to meet where the class is at. And I would just continue to use the pre-assessments to understand where students are starting. Formative assessments like that can really help me adjust my teaching in real time and also just give feedback back to the students, because I don't want them to take something and then like a pre-assessment and get no feedback from me. I feel like that does not help them grow, and then they get to the summative assessment and it's a one try, you're done. And I don't really feel like that really fits best for student learning, because if they don't know what they're doing wrong or maybe what they're missing, they're not going to change it, and then their summative assessments are just going to keep showing the same thing.
Awesome.
And then
sorry.
You're all good. And then summative assessments just are helping me overall evaluate their understanding. I would use those assessment data to make instructional decisions, especially within student teaching, and that I'm coming in the second half of their school year. I don't have that first half to really get to know those students and where they're starting at. So definitely using those pre-assessments will help kind of see what they maybe have learned in that first 1 or 2 quarters or semesters, however they use it. And then if they're struggling with like retelling events, I can revisit that skill using different strategies before moving forward. But I would also just want to continue designing assessments that are meaningful, engaging, like Where the Wild Things Are. That's a very fun book. I grew up with that book. I feel like I always really enjoyed it, and then bringing in that art too. I can also collaborate with the art teacher or what they're already doing for art within the classroom. So in different content areas, I would adapt the same structure use it starting with foundational skills and then building towards deeper thinking and ending with that application task. So like in this assessment, it's building their wild thing and creating the story about their wild thing. But this approach just overall helps create a classroom where assessment is ongoing, supportive, not scary to students, because sometimes that final assessment can be very nerve-wracking. But it's also just focused on growth rather than their overall performance.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing your thinking today. I appreciate the time and care you have put into this work, and I look forward to seeing how your assessment practices continue to grow into something resilient, inclusive, and service-oriented, something that shows up in your future classroom to transform the lives of the many students you will one day teach.